Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to learn about shifting left and secure coding trainings. We're going to talk a little bit about a Elixir Livebook curriculum that we built over at Podium, and I'm super excited to be here at my first ElixirConf. So, quick introduction to who I am. My name is Holden Oullette. I'm a security professional based out of Portland, Oregon. I've been in cybersecurity now for about 7 years, 6, 7 years now. Working in quite a few different areas of security, but most notably I've been working in application security. And for the past 3 years, I've been helping build out the various internal security teams over at Podium, securing its Elixir microservices and working with developers such as yourselves to teach about security in a meaningful way and prevent insecure code from affecting our customers. So a quick note about Podium. If you haven't heard of us before, we're a SaaS-based company whose mission is to modernize the way business is done locally through our communications and payments platform. Excuse me. Our goal is to become the operating system for local businesses. It's for this reason that we take security very seriously at Podium, since a compromised account or data leakage could mean hundreds of thousands of local businesses would be impacted, and potentially millions of their customers would also be affected. As a security team at Podium, we aim to be the metaphorical Windows defender to Podium's OS, Windows OS. So part of that defense revolves around empowering our developers to build secure code from the get-go, which served as the inspiration for the curriculum I'll be talking about today. It's also worth mentioning that Podium's looking for more talented Elixir engineers. So if this sounds interesting to you, come check us out. So hopefully now I've kind of made it a little clear who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. So let's kind of dive in. So these are the kind of three main things I'd like to kind of have you guys take away from this conversation. Number one, security is really hard. There's so much to security, and I just want to talk a little bit about what that means in an Elixir context, which hopefully better sets the scene for my second key takeaway, which is the Elixir Secure Coding Training, ESCT for short, which is the aforementioned curriculum made in Elixir Livebooks. Not only will I discuss the content found within the Livebooks, but the experience of completing it as a learner, as well as the setup process for educators seeking to deploy it for their entire organization. And then the third and final thing I want to leave everybody with is we're in this together, right? Like me and you, security engineer, software engineer, Batman, Robin, right? Okay, I think we get it. So my goal is to make a community, right? Like the goal with the ESCT isn't to be a super specific one and done sort of neat project for Podium to use, but instead a framework for Elixir-based companies to educate their engineering workforce in a manner that's engaging to them. So what does the security landscape for Elixir even look like? Like I mentioned before, security is really hard. There is so much to it, and if you don't believe me, you can ask any number of these companies, right? These are just some of the companies that have been impacted by security incidences over the past decade, and in the effort of fairness and transparency, not all of these have stemmed from direct exploits or code insecurity. Some of them just occur from plain old phishing, which we won't talk about today, but mainly just trying to point out that even these large companies can be affected, so it can happen to any of us. So, a little quiz question for everybody. Does anybody know how many companies on this list use Elixir? Just shout it out. Numbers. 2? We got a 2 in the back. 3? Hey, we got a winner. It is 3. Now, I want to add that, and I don't mean to imply that their issues stemmed from their use of Elixir. I just thought it was a fun coincidence. And if you're watching this and you work for any of these companies, please don't kick me off your platform. I use all of these every day. I'd be very sad. So while we're talking about Elixir, though, and security, let's chat about Erlang and Elixir security a little bit. So I want to preface that Jose and team and the community as a whole, for that matter, have created a wonderful ecosystem that champions secure by default practices. Things like Elixir's concurrency model and queries in Ecto are perfect examples of what it's like to develop software in a secure way from the onset. But does that make it impervious to application security risks? Well, no. It would be really cool if that was the case, right? I wouldn't have a job, but it'd still be cool. Some notable examples of insecurities in Erlang and Elixir have already been outlined very well by the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation and their security working group. They include things like atom exhaustion, timing attacks, Boolean coercion, and there's some other ones like deployment hardening, but I find the first three the most fascinating. I don't know about you, but so it kind of covers some of the insecurities, just some, with the underlying language itself. But what about more specific, like implementation-specific insecurities? If you were building a web app, for example, you'd most likely use Phoenix, right? So Below is a static application security testing tool built in Elixir for Phoenix applications, which also coincidentally was demoed at ElixirConf a few years ago. It does a really great job at analyzing code, detecting potential web vulnerabilities, and some of those issues that it detects are the aforementioned issues identified by the EEF. So if you marry this SaaS tool with your CI/CD pipeline, you'd have a pretty solid foundation for protecting your code bases from introducing vulnerabilities before sending them off to production. So that's it, right? Security, just web app, throw Below on it, you're good to go. Well, not quite. So the bolded topics on the slide are just a few of the areas that you still have to be mindful of when you build your applications, right? Topics like insecure design, which cover things like not inherently building risky functionality. Logging failures, where you might be accidentally logging PII or PHI to your telemetry stacks. So some of the unbolded topics, so cryptographic failures, injection, vulnerable and outdated components, are somewhat covered through using the language itself, the libraries, even using Below. But it's still important to be familiar with those topics because you don't want to just assume you never have to worry about them, right? So the astute among you may recognize these topics specifically, because they are very specific, with the OWASP Top 10 as of 2021. Now, the OWASP is a very prolific and free web resource for learning about all different kinds of web security, both offensive and defensive. If you've never heard of it before, please check it out. It's great. I'm a big proponent of OWASP and their methodologies, but if you spend any time digging through their documentation, you'll realize pretty quickly that it's not incredibly Elixir friendly, right? Their code examples are very Java, .NET based. And honestly, it can be a little, off-putting to newer engineers who have maybe never had to think about the security implications of the code that they write. So far we've been looking at Elixir security almost entirely through the lens of application security risks of web services, right? But that just barely scratches the surface of the world that we live in. There's so much more beyond just web services that Elixir now touches, right? And we as a community should be mindful of everything that's out there as we build our unique solutions. So obviously that is a ton, right? It's a lot of ground to cover. And it can be pretty overwhelming, I think, to have to remember all of that stuff in detail every single time you write a line of code, you release some product functionality, anything, right? And that's kind of why security professionals are here, right? We work with you and amongst your teams to be able to think about these things in tandem with your development processes, right? And work towards ingraining ourselves into those processes in a lightweight way and not get in the way. During my time at Podium, I've helped prevent the release of functionality and remediated issues that have stemmed from almost all of the aforementioned topics. And that's even with having tools like Below implemented at the CI/CD level to block before going out to production. So if that's the case, right, if it's that difficult to catch these things, how do we prevent vulnerabilities from being introduced? We shift left, right? It's the title of the talk, but what even is shifting left? So quick show of hands, who's heard of the term shifting left? All right, And has it been in like a security context? Keep them raised? Yeah? Cool. So yeah, if you're not familiar, the general idea is that measures to reduce risk are pushed further left into the development lifecycle, right? If deployment and code upkeep and maintenance are on the right side, so at the end, then ideation and code planning is at the leftmost side. So the goal with shifting left, it would be to introduce systemic mitigations to prevent the release of vulnerabilities as early as possible. While my job as an application security engineer is to introduce mitigations at every point in the life cycle, it's a cultural mentality to, we push to strive to be as left-leaning as possible. And it's with that shift-left mentality in mind that we can finally talk about the ESCT. Ooh, acronyms. I know what you might be thinking a little bit when you hear secure coding training, and that you've taken corporate security trainings before, and if you have to listen to one more slideshow about how you shouldn't plug in a USB you found on the ground, you're going to lose it. But this isn't that. Personally speaking, my absolute favorite part of working in cybersecurity, besides just living out my 90s hacker movie dreams, is instead, it's that light bulb moment, right, of being able to break a system and make it do something that it wasn't intended to do, right? But more than just my own light bulb moment, I really enjoy any light bulb moment, including helping others learn enough about security to make that connection for themselves. And I think today, you just can't really facilitate that sort of moment from happening in most current offerings for secure coding training, especially ones that require training Elixir engineers. I've learned through running internal cybersecurity capture the flag events at Podium that you can encourage that moment, though, by engaging developers right where they're most at home, working on technical problems and learning about something new, hands-on. But getting buy-off to run those events is pretty hard and really expensive, and more than that, it's usually limited to once a year, right? And it's great for that one day a year, but what happens in between when you hire new engineers and they don't, maybe they would have benefited from that. So the question then becomes, how do you create that light bulb moment for everyone in your company on an ongoing basis? And our answer is the Elixir Secure Coding Training, which is administered by Elixir Livebook. Complete with interactive secure code examples, quiz questions, and approachable teachings, the ESCT is a curriculum designed to be implemented for an individual engineer to take at their own pace and receive immediate automated feedback upon completion to determine whether or not the knowledge has been imparted. As a security engineer, this eliminates the need to administer trainings and manually score potentially hundreds of submissions. As an engineer, you're able to learn about security topics specific for your development environments. As an organization that may need to comply with certain compliance requirements regarding security training, you can guarantee that your teams are learning only the most relevant topics that'll actually have an impact to their day-to-day. The training itself is made up of multiple Livebook files we call modules, each dedicated to a specific area of security. Each module has lessons within it, most containing code examples to run and quiz-type questions that require the consumer to edit the code so they perform a certain action and have a certain output. There are currently 8 primary topics, as seen here: OWASP, the secure SDLC, GraphQL, Elixir security, cookie security, security anti-patterns, CI/CD tooling, and a section we call the secure road. Now, these particular modules were developed specifically because of the stack that Podium uses. And as previously mentioned, we're an Elixir microservice shop, but it's mainly just for our backends, right? Most of our front end is served via React JavaScript files and interact with our backends using GraphQL. So our developers need to be educated on more web security topics compared to a company that maybe leans more hardware or even uses live views and Pedal, right? So let's kind of go a little bit through each of the modules, and hopefully it paints a better picture of like what's inside. Ooh. Is there a video? Is it playing? Uh-oh. Oh no, that's not good. Well, how do we feel about doing a live? Okay, this will go well. So, so this is the Livebook. This is the introduction. We start the introduction to the curriculum with how you interact with it, along with a table of contents. And we also provide rough time estimations for how long it should take an engineer to complete a module based on the content. As it stands now, it should take roughly about a little over 2 hours to take on an average pace. Okay. And then, I apologize, I am not mirroring. So yeah, you kind of just click over on this next one. Okay. Oh no. Oh, I stopped my, okay. Well, I don't think this is going to work too much. So the next section that you can't see is the OWASP top 10 as it pertains to Elixir. And it has many different relevant code examples, as many as possible to punctuate the topic. Our goal with introducing the OWASP top 10 here is twofold. Not only are we covering specific security topics, but also familiarizing developers with resources out there that they may not have known about before and how it applies to their work. So that was the last video, so hopefully we won't have that issue. All right, so the next module is the secure SDLC concepts. This module is for a few cherry-picked items that, while they may relate to the OWASP top 10 in some regard, they may need a little bit extra attention. Right? So they include things like not having secrets in code. It's pretty explicit. Making secret rotation easy. Rate limiting, what that means. Application rate limiting versus network rate limiting. Principle of least privilege. Those are all kind of things you'd find in this module. As previously mentioned, we use GraphQL APIs, and as such, we feel it necessary to educate our developers on techniques on how to best secure that stack, which includes strategies such as disabling introspection on production, being very mindful of the errors that you disclose, and resource exhaustion with more advanced techniques such as using cost theory to try and preemptively shut down resource exhaustion. The Elixir security section content isn't terribly surprising since we already kind of covered it a little bit at the beginning of the talk, but at this point in time, we go over it in the course materials. It's worth mentioning, though, since we're here, that one of the core concepts of the entire ESCT is a focus on the community rather than the individual. As such, the material found within the training has been sourced from many reputable sources, and credit is given where credit is due, right? And this kind of allows for the truly curious consumer of the content, handy links and resources to kind of go out and venture out on their own and become more familiar with what's out there. Since Podium's focused on providing a web-based SaaS platform, we have web cookies. So this module, we discuss the components of a cookie, what the implications of various settings of a cookie are, and how to assign the perfect cookie in Phoenix. And so we've all heard of code patterns, whether publicly known code patterns or more specific patterns that are more relevant to your companies. Code patterns help guide how best to approach common problems to avoid complexity and non-scalability. But in this module, we want to call out this concept of security anti-patterns, approaches that will more than likely lead to vulnerabilities or insecurities later down the line, while also making it more difficult to preemptively find them. So that includes things like front-end only like authorization checks or obfuscation only as your only form of defense, like that kind of thing. So there's more to SDLC than just writing code, right? And by extension, that also means there are more methods of securing the SDLC beyond just reviewing code. We feel that it's important to highlight tools that you may see in your CI/CD pipelines and understand what they are, how they work, under the hood especially, and what to do as a developer should they result in a finding. Right? As it applies to Elixir, this module currently discusses the aforementioned so below to start, but then it talks about two other tools that you may not have heard of before. So the first is being Salus. Salus is an open source SaaS orchestration tool developed by the folks over at Coinbase. It essentially acts as a wrapper for many other open source SaaS tools across multiple languages and runs only the relevant tools on the code base in question. This is particularly useful if you still have lingering other services that don't use Elixir, but maybe they will someday. as we need to equally support all services from a security perspective. And at Podium, we've been using a private fork of So Below that we're actually in the midst of getting merged into the public branch that includes So Below as part of their suite. So that's pretty neat. And then the last tool currently included in this module is a tool called SymGrep. Now, SymGrep is an incredibly powerful semantic code analysis tool that honestly, it deserves its own talk. So please check it out for more information, because I'm not going to do it justice here. But at its core, it translates almost 20 different languages into abstract syntax trees, and then is able to apply a set of both language agnostic and language specific configuration rules to try and detect insecurity and vulnerabilities in your code. These rules are written in YAML, so it's incredibly easy to configure and deploy and keep managed at scale. It's primarily a security tool, but it's also useful for adherence to code patterns. And as of a couple weeks ago, Podium collaborated with the maintainers of SymGrep over at R2C to get experimental support of Elixir into the main branch. So this is an incredibly exciting development, and speaking personally, I will be spending a considerable amount of time furthering support and creating rules for this in the next coming weeks, so updates to come. So the last module in the training is the secure road. The general idea behind it is to share examples of data systems that can be built in a few different ways, right? One way being a more secure way, and the other being insecure, but still accomplishes the same requirements, right? The examples can be a touch contrived, but the primary point of this section is to highlight that you can build something a number of different ways and really encourage folks to step back and take a pause and think about the security implications of what they're building. So, okay, I've kind of gone over what's inside currently, but how would you use it if you wanted to, right? I think it's pretty easy. I think all you got to do is, you fork the repo, whether that's from the public version or the customized version provided by your company. Then you git clone that repo, so you have local access to the files, and you can load it into whatever instance of Livebook that you want, whether it's the Docker version, desktop, fly.io, whatever you want. You complete the modules as instructed, as it kind of coaxes you into, completing them at your own pace, and then you create a PR to your own fork with your local changes, and we have an auto grader that will grade as it tries to merge into the main branch. If it passes, you've succeeded, and if it doesn't, it will give you an output on how you failed to try and tweak it and try it again. So, generally speaking, I also think that if you're an educator looking to deploy this for your company, I think it's pretty straightforward too. I think basically the only thing that you need to know, aside from being a champion for it internally and externally, is knowing that you're encouraged to make a private fork. To make the training, incorporate your own best practices, especially if you don't want certain areas to be public or not, or if there's certain modules that just really don't apply to you. For example, at Podium, initially we don't use the public version of the ESCT, right? Especially this particular example, we replace the section on disabling introspection with our own, because we've developed an internal plug specifically for us, right, that disables introspection. So we want to encourage our developers to get familiar with it, learn how to use it, and how it applies to them very specifically, whereas the public version is more vague and generic. But also as an aside, I think we're going to release that plug next week, so that's cool. So yeah, I think that's kind of an example of how you would adjust it based on your experience and what you want to get out of the training. So, as it's kind of been alluded to at this point, I am very excited to announce that as of today, as of a few hours ago, the beta has gone public. It's in Podium's GitHub organization space. It's open for you to use personally or to deploy for your companies. Just a fair warning, it's a little rough around the edges, so feedback is more than welcome. I hope that I've been able to kind of paint a picture why this training is so cool to me, and that it sounds interesting enough for you to check out. But I don't think that the buck stops here when it comes to security training. I think that it brings me to my final takeaway, right? My dream is to see a thriving, secure Elixir community, iterating and improving upon the resources made available through this training, right? much like the resources made available through OWASP, I'd like to see us create a sense of shared ownership, right, through secure Elixir best practices. And I want this to be useful for all skill levels and all companies that use the Elixir ecosystem. I think there's so much more that can be done, right? Just even beyond the modules and the layout that I highlighted today, right? I think that there's so much that could be added to really make it for everyone. And I think that we need everybody's help to get it there. Speaking of more Elixir content, my experience with working with Elixir is very specific to the tech stack at Podium, right? Before I worked here, I barely knew what Elixir was, right? And so this first wave of content is very focused on web security. But like I mentioned earlier, web security is just one small piece of the puzzle, right? I believe that there are security implications for things to consider with things like how you create live views, right? And Livebooks on Nerve, Nerve projects, right? That's been called out before, but let's get it all in one place, right? How does Credo fit into security anti-pattern checks? Even the potential abuse and manipulation of machine learning models generated by NX, right? That's a pretty growing field that I'd love to highlight here. Besides Elixir, right? We still have other parts of the stack that we as software engineers need to service and create things for, right? And it still falls in our domain. Obviously, I highlighted GraphQL. REST wasn't there. We just don't use REST. But I'd love to get a module on REST, gRPC, service mesh patterns, even cryptography, right? I think that'd be great, and maybe even quantum cryptography. I think that'd be pretty cool. There are also other things under the hood of the training beyond just the content and the livebook portion of the curriculum that need some help, namely improving code examples, right? Listen, I'm a code breaker. I know my Elixir code is rough, and also creating them with the constraint that they need to be compatible with the auto grader provides a very unique challenge. So I'm very welcoming of help. But additionally, if you noticed before, I did mention it's a beta, 0.8, and one of the last things I really need to get finished and wrapped up before we get out the door is finalizing the auto grader and making it VCS agnostic, right? We have GitLab, so we're really focused on building out the GitLab CI automation, but also we could build it as a GitHub action, right? So supporting everybody's ecosystems is really important, and that's kind of the final step before I would consider it a 1.0 release. So beyond just adding content or the technical side of things, the ESCT has room to be refined through smaller improvements, right? To the voice of the lessons, the formatting of topics, even adding more engaging visuals, mermaid charts, GIFs, memes, even emojis, right? A lot of the potential around this area of improvement is around extending the concept of approachability with the training. This is for everyone, so it really should be consumable by everyone. Once there's a solid base for automated deployment and more rigid adjustment of the curriculum itself, it's only natural that developer participation should at least be tracked in some regards, right? And hopefully the very nature of the training being engaging will increase participation naturally, but should you need to report on completion rates for compliance reasons or reporting reasons, it'd be pretty handy to be able to integrate this with your internal deployment with learning management systems or identity providers or SSOs to theoretically add some checks and balances for make sure people get it done in time, right? Final thing is Livebook, right? Livebook is just getting started, right? And there are a few features in the works now that I could see having a very substantial impact on what's even possible with this training, right? I think the biggest one that comes to mind is secrets management, that could change how the ESCT is deployed in the first place, but also it could change how we build code examples and quiz questions. So all of the things I kind of just rattled off and surrounding the potential roadmap, new features, have all been outlined as issues on the GitHub project. It's already more than that. I think it's higher, it's at 26, 27 now. I tried to add kind of a first pass of contribution guidelines. And I should also mention that you don't need to be a security professional to in order to speak to best practices for a given area or to help contribute any sorts of code examples, right? There are plenty of tasks that aren't even related to security. And I think that a better communal learning experience means a more secure world. So please check out the repo. It's under the Podium organization on GitHub. And again, the entire roadmap has been turned into issues that are ripe for contribution. And if you feel like listening to my musings about security, pinball, or coffee, you can follow me on Twitter. And you're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn and hit me up about any openings you might find interesting at Podium. So thank you for listening.